We should have seen this coming, honestly. We should have had a feeling that the world was not ready for Carolina and Stanford to coexist in the ACC with Anson Dorrance as part of it. And so we had to remove one of these factors, and it was that Anson Dorrance retired. Is that why? Because you were afraid the world would just explode?
Well, actually, I didn't have any fear of the world exploding upon my retirement. And actually, to be honest, I was excited that Stanford was in the conference because let's face it, what's going to happen now to them, and they are an exceptional program, is their athletes are all going to be brain dead after 2 or 3 years from living on airplanes. And again, what I would throw out there is I think we have to question Stanford's academic status if all of their athletes remain in school while flying across the country for a couple years. And so I think this will be a challenge to see if they are actually a legitimate academic institution.
We'll find out.
We will find out.
That's the kind of thing we're going to miss from Anson Dorrance. Announced his retirement over the weekend, had the press conference on Monday. We're recording this in the middle of the week. You're hearing it on Friday. What have these last few days been like for you?
Well, actually, they've been wonderful. I've hugged my wife every morning because, and anyone knows this that coaches for a living, gosh, your family is under huge pressure. Certainly your wife is trying to manage everything. And one of the things I really admired about Dean Smith, and of course, hopefully we'll continue to talk about him forever, certainly if I'm being interviewed, he said this, I think, in either a book or somewhere. He said, I am very proud that I retired a coach. And all of us that coach understand what he means. I mean, we didn't sort of jump ship and end up in athletic administration. We remain basically on the front lines where, every single day you're being judged publicly by your performance. Most people's performances are hidden from the public. But the thing that's really interesting about a coach's life is you hang everything over the rail. And you are under constant scrutiny for so many different things. And obviously because of lighting up, a defeat or a scandal that involves athletics is so popular. So you're under an amazing kind of scrutiny. And the people that suffer the most, honestly, are your family. So for me, I just wanted Melissa to know that I really appreciated her constant support. Because there were some dark days back there, and she and some extraordinary people were always with me during the dark days. And of course, if you were to ask me, well, if you had something to change, what would you change? I would change nothing. Because looking at how my kids grew up, looking at my life right now, looking at where I continue to be, I'm living in paradise, and I just look back on incredible fondness. For everything about this extraordinary university and the people that I'm associated with here.
How did you get to the point where you woke up the next day after you had made the decision, whenever that was, and felt like it was okay? You were at peace with it and this was the right thing to do?
Well, I was at peace with it immediately. And honestly, I could have been at peace with it earlier. So it wasn't like, all of a sudden it came to me now. Obviously, I think every one of us that compete at the highest level would love to go out on a glorious national championship run. But you can look at all the extraordinary programs that are out there with all of these great coaches, and it's so unbelievably difficult to do. So for me, if I could have, constructed a dream scenario, that would have been it. And I think Melissa really wanted that as well. Not so much for her, but for me. It didn't happen. I thought we had a really good shot, not only 2 years ago when within 16 seconds and a blind referee, we lost the national championship, but even last year. Last year's team was very, very good. In fact, to some extent, it was better than the previous year's team. And why can I say that? Because the team that almost won the national championship 2 years ago, almost every one of those kids returned. And we had two brilliant All-American players coming back in addition to the entire team coming back. But there were a lot of different issues that made it difficult for us to sort of attain the same status. And of course, I do nothing but credit an extraordinary Brigham Young University team that, down 3-0 at the half, they came back and beat us 4-3. And I do nothing but, tip my hat to their extraordinary athletes and coaching staff. But basically, the way I look at it is, I should have done better. Because we had a very talented team. And how do I know this? Well, first of all, we had an undefeated regular season, which is pretty good. Not too many teams, in collegiate athletics have an undefeated regular season. We also had 11 kids sign first division professional contracts. 11 people start the game in soccer. Can you imagine any athletic program at any level that would have their entire 11 starters sign first division professional contracts? That's an incredible tribute to the young women that killed themselves to get there. And so I look back with a lot of positives. Now, the areas that I felt I had to do better in, one of them was a rule change that none of us liked, which was there's no more overtime anymore. And so our game is really bizarre. I think the two most difficult games to win consistently are baseball and soccer. Baseball, and you would probably know more about this than I do, how rare it is for the number one team going into the College World Series. It is incredibly rare that the number one team ever wins the national championship. And it's not like that team isn't any good. They come in as the consensus, number one seed, and yet very rarely do they win it. So I think baseball is that kind of game, but soccer is as well, because of the bizarre paradox of the ease and difficulty of scoring. You can outshoot a team 40-1 and lose 1-0. You can't lose that game in football or basketball or lacrosse, and I could go down all the sports. You can't lose that game. In our game, you can, because the ball in the back of the net is based on an eighth of an inch on your foot. It's just so incredibly quirky. And yet our game can also be completely smothered by what's called the low block. The low block is the strategy of a team that's not as talented to stay in the game. So when you play a low block, you can basically put 11 people in the penalty box and then end up tying the game at the end. Well, what my colleagues and all of their genius decided to do this year was to say that there was no overtime. So all you had to do was to hang on for 90 minutes by playing, your entire team in the penalty box, and you would tie the game. So last season, we tied 8 times. We've never tied that many. We've tied 7 times going into overtime a couple years before, but we ended up winning 4 of those games, because to hold a team away and out for an additional 20 minutes is incredibly difficult in our game. So what's starting to happen now is a lot of the coaches, when we send out these polls on, well, what should we do? Should we change overtime? Should we do this? Should we do that? All the coaches that struggle to compete at the highest level, and keep in mind we have over 320 teams that basically compete in Division I women's soccer. The majority of those teams don't want to have a long game. In fact, if they continue to go in this direction, we will have a 5-minute game, and then every single team will end up with a tie at the end of the game, basically glorifying the team that is ranked, 320th in Division I. Now, are we really going to decide to make decisions based on majority vote? Well, yes, that's how we decide. And so the majority of the teams would love to figure out a way not to get beaten. So how do they vote? They vote in the most conservative fashion. So I really hate the direction we're going in, because it's crushing our game. And last fall was an example of this sort of, in my opinion, ridiculous direction to go in. And of course, these coaches are, probably professing something like, the medical staff feels that, with a 2-game week, if you're playing overtime, the risk of injury is so extraordinary. And so they bring to bear all of this medical data. And of course, then how is the committee and the leadership supposed to respond? They can't remain calloused and then end up getting sued in court for their, lack of compassion or interest in student athlete health, and then of course we end up making all these absolutely inane decisions like that one. But I look back on last year with an incredible amount of pride for the number of extraordinary players that we produced, but also for the great successes we had. The shining star of last season was the Florida State team. They were extraordinary. That may have been the greatest Florida State team I've ever seen in my life, and yet, if you were at our Florida State game, you would have thought we were the superior team. They tied us with 7 seconds to go, and even now when we recruit a kid, because obviously they're going to also be recruited by Florida State, we say, please watch our game against Florida State. And what does Florida State have under their belt? Well, they're reigning national champions, ACC champions. I mean, they check every conceivable box. They also beat the absolute garbage out of Stanford. I think it was 5-1 or 5-0 in the national championship game. And yet, if they watched, if a recruit watched our game against Florida State, they would come to the conclusion, oh my gosh, North Carolina was the superior team. So I look back on last year with sort of mixed emotions. I think I made some mistakes, but there were moments when I thought, oh my gosh, this group is doing extraordinarily well.
The predominant reason why the Florida States and the BYUs and the UCLAs, even though that was an absolutely horrific no call, if you don't know what Anson's talking about, look at the 2022 championship game. You'll get mad all over again. But I digress. The Florida States, the BYUs, the UCLAs, the predominant reason why they've been able to reach the heights they have is your program. I mean, you started that. So when you see teams like that, is there any sense of satisfaction of we climbed the mountain so all the rest of you could get here?
Not at all. I wanted to always beat all of them to death on a consistent basis, so I take absolutely no pride in that. But obviously, I mean, the game's changing. The coaches are getting better. The player pool is getting deeper and more varied. And so more of us are sharing a collection of the elite players. And so there is a kind of parity because the game is getting better. So, I certainly credit what's happening in this country because the women's soccer game has exploded, not just locally, but internationally as well. I remember we took incredible pride when we had over 90,000 people, watching the United States win a World Cup final in 1999. And that was the apogee of women's athletics. And I'm not just talking about women's soccer athletics. I'm talking about women's athletics. And now what's happening at Barcelona, they're getting, 93,000 regularly at their games. And now what's happening in England, they're moving their women's professional teams from the small academy stadium that seats anywhere from 15 to, 20,000 to the main stadiums that are hosting, Manchester City, the Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool. They are now shifting their women's teams from the smaller stadiums to the big ones. And then what are they doing? They're selling it out. So our game is just accelerating at an extraordinary rate. And I'm very proud of being a part of that. So for me, yes, being a part of the rise of the women's game has been an incredible sense of pride for me. And then even in my, American exceptionalism hat, I love the fact that we're still beating the world at its own game. I'm sitting there watching the amazing Crystal Dunn at left back, the amazing Emily Fox at right back, and I'm watching us play the world at its own game, and I'm seeing us win another world championship. The Olympics in women's soccer is the national team. In men's soccer, it's not. It's a U23 team with, a couple of overage players. But for us, what we have every 4-year cycle are 2 world championships. We have a World Cup and an Olympics. And right now with that victory, and I credit every player on that team, certainly U.S. Soccer and Emma Hayes, we are in a position now where we have won 9 world championships, 4 basically World Cups and 5 Olympics. The rest of the world combined has won 8. And this is the world's game. So for me, I take great pride in being a part of that ascension, the American, women's soccer ascension. And I certainly collect all of the remarkable coaches in this country that have helped put us there, but also the ambition of these amazing young women that have decided, you know what, I want to be really good at this sport.
So what was it about the University of North Carolina that allowed the first ripple of the tidal wave that you just described to happen here?
Well, one thing I take great pride in is right after we won the 2019 World Championship, one of the pundits got on the screen and said something effective, oh, by the way, I've just done the math. Of the 4 World Championship teams to the United States, 1 out of 3 players were trained at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I mean, my heart and ego were soaring like hawks because, I'm very proud of that. I am proud that even compared to every professional team in the world, we have produced more gold medalists and world champions than any other environment. So that's been our cachet. That's been what we recruit with. If you want to become absolutely extraordinary, we're going to help get you there. And I think the coaches we've had over the years, certainly me and Bill Palladino and Chris Ducar, that goes back to the original era of women's collegiate soccer, and more recently, obviously, Damon Nahas, Chris Ducar again, and Tracy Bates-Leon. I think we do things at an extremely high level. And I'm very proud of that. And we try to stay on the cutting edge. We're always, continuing to research our own game, and we try to make, little changes to make sure we can stay right on the cutting edge. But for me, that's been an incredible sense of pride for me. That, of all the places in the world, the Barcelonas, the Arsenals, the Manchester Cities, the Bayern Munichs, all of the hotbeds, this is the most glorious place to develop your game.
How'd you recruit when you didn't have those credentials to recruit with, when you were just some guy?
Yeah, I was, a young bloviating moron. And just
That's
trying
what
to.
people say about me now. We got something in common.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So, what you're trying to do is to convince people that you know the way. And so, I think when you start out, when you have absolutely no credibility, you're just, putting your nose to the grindstone. You're trying to, overturn every stone. My wife reminded me of this, by the way, the other day when I was hugging her in the morning. She said, Anson, I know you kept telling me, this was all going to work out. And she was reminding me back in the old days when I used to stay at work until 9 or 10 at night because I was so desperate to do something with my life. In fact, I was in there late at night at work, and one of my previous athletic directors that evening happened to also be in the building. This is back when my office was in Carmichael. My office originally, by the way, was Paul Doty's closet. I had to walk through Paul Doty, our head men's lacrosse coach, to get into my office because I was in his closet. Actually, that wasn't even my first office. My first office was the corner of Moyer Smith's desk. I was a law student at the time. I would come in, and his wonderful secretary in the corner of her desk would have all of my mail stacked. And I would sit there in front of her, and I would, answer all of my mail, hand it back to her, and she would type it up and send it off. And then, I'd be off to practice or something. So my original office was the corner of Moyer Smith's secretary's desk. Well, I ascended to Paul Doty's closet. What an incredible ascension. And poor Paul. I mean, I would walk in on these heated, player conferences. And, it was so nerve-wracking. But one night, while I was working in Carmichael, one of my athletic directors came by and he said, Anson, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm recruiting, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And he said, go home. I said, what do you mean? I said, I am ordering you to go home. I said, why are you ordering me to go home? I would think you would be impressed the fact I'm here working late at night. He says, you are one of the few coaches left in this athletic department that are not divorced. And I want you to make sure you go home and take care of your sweet wife. And what an incredibly positive thing for your athletic director to say. In other words, stop working and take care of your family. And I really appreciated that. Coming from, I think it may even have been Bill Kobe, who was, of course, my first boss. Yeah, I've worked hard. I am a workaholic. One thing I conceded in the press conference is I've always hated vacations, and my wife has always known this. I would go on a vacation, and I would just be so agitated because I was thinking that someone was getting ahead of me somewhere, and that drove me crazy. And then this past summer, my wife and I were celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. Maybe because on that particular night, Bill Kobe sent me home to see my wife. And we spent 2 weeks in basically Lisbon, where my wife was born, Rome, Tuscany, Vinci, the home of Leonardo da. And, so we really enjoyed 2 weeks. And you know what? I kind of like that. So I know what happened. I know I worked hard to get there. And the other thing was, in the old days, I supplemented my own budgets. And it used to drive Melissa crazy. And I kept telling her, honey, I believe in myself. So I never turned in a recruiting receipt for the first, 15, 20 years of my marriage because my budget couldn't afford it. And we used to, and Bill Palladino will verify this, Bill Palladino and I made a lot of money from our soccer camps. And what did our soccer camps also do, which interfered with our own income? Well, I never believed in going over budget. So I went over budget. I think I've gone over budget every single year of my coaching life. But what I would always do is I would pay for our overage out of our camp income. So what that meant is Bill Palladino and I from camp were sponsoring our own budget here at the University of North Carolina. But I'm exceptionally proud of that. I mean, I'm not a whiner. I've never begged for anything. Actually, at the press conference, I told everyone publicly I've never asked for a raise in my life because we've got 28 sports here and we have limited resources. And there was no way I was going to demand something that was going to be taking money from another sport that I also wanted to see succeed here. So for me, I have certain principles that I live by. Not whining is one, but also I've always had an extraordinary confidence. Confidence has never been a personal problem of mine, and I think I've lived off that ridiculous feeling that I could do absolutely anything.
And for people who don't know, who don't live in the athletics world, camp money is a big deal. So when you're taking camp money to put it back into the program, that does not occur in most cases, except for yours, apparently.
Well, actually, I think there's some environments where the camp income for the coach is actually a part of his budget, where they pay the coach a salary for working camp, and they take the camp profits and they put it into the operating budget, maybe not just of that team, but maybe of the athletic departments. And so I feel, again, privileged that they gave me the freedom to basically do whatever I wanted to with the money I made in camp. So I think what really helped was a work ethic. But the other thing that I also think helped is when I came into the women's game, I was the men's coach. So I was accustomed to recruiting aggressively like you would have to do on the men's side to stay competitive. But also I took an experience level of coaching into the women's game that a lot of young women's coaches don't have because I had been coaching the men. And then the other thing, I think there's a multiplier effect when you're coaching two teams at once. And in the case of me during a stretch, 3 teams, because there was a stretch when I was coaching the men here at UNC, the women here at UNC, and the women's national team. And what you gain by coaching 3 teams at once is a wonderful collection of experiences because you're making mistakes all the time. All of us do. And yet what you're doing, if you're accelerating your coaching experience by coaching 2 teams at once, it's almost like if I've been coaching the men and women for 10 years, it's like coaching one team for 20 years. And I completely believe that. So for me, the amount of experience I got in all aspects of coaching was extraordinary because I was asked to coach 2 teams early and then for a while 3 teams because while I was coaching the national team, I was a part-time women's national team coach as the head coach. And so I think all these pieces, when you add them all together, put me in a remarkable position to have a lot of experience as a young women's coach. And then, of course, I could see the potential in the women's game. And then I give John Swafford full credit. I went in and said, you know, Swaff, this is killing me coaching two teams, because when I'm recruiting for the women, they're telling all the recruits you're spending all the time with the men. When you're recruiting for the men, they're telling all the recruits you're spending all your time with the women. We got to cut the program in half. I've got a great men's assistant named Elmar Bolovich. He and I have already chatted, and I know we can't, you know, all of a sudden have two head coaches making extraordinary amounts of money and two completely separate budgets. So I literally took the one budget I had where I was paying for the men and women out of it, and Elmar agreed to become the head men's soccer coach on his assistant men's soccer coach's salary. We literally took the budget and cut it right down the middle. So half of that budget went to the men, half of that budget went to the women, and then all of a sudden I was coaching one team. Because I coached the men as the men's coach from 1976. 76, I was a head coach designate. 77 and 78, I was the head coach. And then in 79, that's when Bill Kobe, I think in reaction to Title IX, gave me a women's team. And then from 79 to 88, I coached both. And during that stretch from 86 to 94, I was also the U.S. women's national team coach. So for me, there was just a lot of experience in there, and I am absolutely convinced that helped me.
Speaking of things that helped you, you mentioned Melissa at the press conference. You mentioned Dick Bedour. When the biggest storms came, how did they help you navigate through those so that you weren't doing it by yourself?
Well, that's, again, where Dickie came in. I mean, what I loved about Dick is he trusted me. And, I mean, I have no issue reviewing the scandal for you if you would like me to on the air. I have no issue with it at all. But basically, when this scandal hit, Dickie stood behind me. And I think maybe 95% of the athletic directors in the country would have fired me. He stood by me because he said, Anson, is any of this true? And I said, absolutely not. And he believed me. And he stood by me. And then, of course, you know, as I mentioned in the press conference, my family would have no issue for us to erect a Dick Bedour statue in the middle of our living room, just because during a very difficult time, this very brave man stood by me. Because, of course, if, you know, I was lying, he could have been caught up in the same scandal. And so he could have sacrificed his own career. And he could have protected it by just doing something very simple. I'm sorry, Anson, you know, this is the negative publicity for the University of North Carolina is too severe, and I'm sorry, I just have to let you go. And I would have said, Dick, I completely understand. So it wasn't like I wasn't empathetic towards, you know, the rock and a hard place where he was caught. But to have great men trust you and believe in you has also been a part of my journey. And so I'll never forget that. Neither will Melissa, Michelle, because, by the way, Michelle was fielding phone calls because back then, no cell phones. So who were all these people calling? They were calling the house. Michelle was a young teenager, so, of course, she was the first one to the phone. So she's hearing all this vitriol through the phone, and because she is a very polite young woman, she wouldn't interrupt the crank caller. And then when the person had finished, all of a sudden what came out of her mouth was extraordinarily aggressive in defense of her father. So I absolutely loved it. And, you know, we look back, and Melissa and I were joking about this the other night. You know, maybe that crucible is part of why the family bond in the Dorrances is so close and real. Because, you know, when you're attacked by everyone that hates you, and trust me, with our success, we have assembled a wonderful collection of aggressive haters, and it cauterized us. I mean, you speak to anyone in my family, they're going to look you in the eye because they're very brave, you know, because of all the different situations they had to live through in defending their father in some cases, or in Melissa's case, you know, her husband. So, you know, I don't regret anything because I think it helped shape who we are as a family.
We talked a couple years ago for a story in the Rams Club magazine, and you told a story about a former player who had told you that you had criticized her very frequently during practices, but through that criticism, she could feel your love. And your kid said something kind of similar. So whether you're a parent or a coach or whoever you are that's listening to this, how do you figure out how to criticize someone in a way that makes them better, but also lets them know that you care?
Well, thank you for giving me that question. I genuinely appreciate it. So the story you're telling is, and I won't bring her name up in case you wouldn't want me to mention her name in this story, but obviously I stay connected with all my kids. And a lot of my players end up signing professional contracts. And one thing I'm incredibly proud of, very rarely do they go to an environment that in their minds is better than this one. So usually when they go someplace, they don't like the way they're treated. They don't like the coach that's treating them poorly. And so they will call me up. And one thing all of them know, I will never criticize their coach. Why will I never do that? Well, because they have to play for this coach. And all of a sudden, if I'm throwing and slagging this coach under the bus, then they're going to think that they're allowed to do that as well. And of course, they're not. What they have to do is they have to figure out how to get on the field for this coach. So when they call me, they know that I am never going to slag their coach. And this one woman was just ranting with me about, Anson, after I played for you, I thought I could play for anyone. Sort of a backhanded compliment in that you were so hard on me. I didn't think there was another coach in the world that would be as hard on me as you were. And then she said, but through your criticism, I could feel your love. That meant the world to me because I do love these kids. But let's face it, it's like being a good parent. You're not a good parent if you spend your life kissing your kid's rear end at every opportunity. You're not a good parent if everything they do warrants a trophy. You're not a good parent if all of a sudden they are trying to make a team somewhere, they're not starting or getting the maximum playing time they would like, and then you're in cahoots with her about criticizing everyone that's involved in the organization and giving excuses for your daughter that's not doing that well or your son in whatever the case happens to be. One of my favorite recent stories is actually one of Dan Hurley, the men's basketball coach at the University of Connecticut. That wonderful gentleman has won 2 national championships in a row. UConn, despite what they're trying to pretend, they're not a blue blood basketball school. They're not a North Carolina, they're not a Duke, they're not a Kentucky, they're not a Kansas. They are not a blue blood basketball school. So who does he recruit? Does he recruit the blue bloods? No, he can't get them. The one and dones are going to all the other schools in the country. He's not getting them. Who is he getting? He's getting the silver medalists. He's getting the kids that are, they're good, but they're not the absolute best. They're not in the top, 10 or 15 or 20, but I don't know enough about basketball to know where the line is between the gold medalists and the silver medalists. But anyway, he's not getting the top players. And yet, he's winning. How is he doing that? Well, I listened to a podcast just by luck one day, and he's telling me how he screens his parents. He screens the parents of the kids he's recruiting by finding out, well, did they take, a trip through 4 different AAU programs in order for the parent and the kid to find just the right set of lips to have their kid's ass kissed for their entire basketball experience? No. Did he find a parent who went from high school to high school all over, Northern Virginia to find, the place where every single play was designed around their kid hitting a 3-point shot in the corner? No. He recruits parents that understand if their kid's not playing, the dad or the mom gets on the phone and says, well, I think you got to work harder. Not, we're out of here. We're in the transfer portal or whatever. Or, what's your NIL deal? No, that's not parenting. That's ass kissing. And if you want to make sure your kid is going to be a cripple for the rest of his or her life, please treat them that way. Bounce them around. Wait till they find the softest possible landing, where with no effort, they don't have to do anything all summer, they're going to get on the field as a starter. Make sure you find that environment for them because, oh my gosh, that's exactly the way to produce an extraordinary human being. And of course, I'm being facetious. No. I really admire and respect what that man did. And I think he should do clinics right now and title the clinic, parental behavior. Be a parent. Make your kid responsible. And by the way, making someone responsible is better than making them accountable. Making them accountable is a blame culture. Making a kid responsible is I am in charge of my own life. That's the progression towards adulthood. So any parents that are listening to this out there, don't hold your kid accountable. Make him responsible. So all of a sudden he is in charge of his or her own life. One of the things I love about having an opportunity to coach my own team is the way I design my program is I want to design a program I would like to play in. I hate rules. I absolutely hate rules. I went to a boys' boarding school for my high school education. If the school had a rule, a collection of us would figure out a way to break it. I don't want anyone telling me what to do, but I do believe in principle-centered living. So what we do with our kids is we don't basically give them a list of rules like you have to show up on time. We don't have a rule about showing up on time. Do you really think that someone that's progressing towards adulthood has to have a rule of showing up on time? Of course you have to show up on time. So we're not burdening them with all this stuff, but now they have to think. And why do I want them to think? Because I want them, by the time they graduate, to be adults. So part of them is taking responsibility for their own lives. Yeah, show up on time. And obviously, there are some kids that obviously do need rules, and we have 4 DEF CONs that can take you to actually having, you have to follow rules culture. In fact, I brought this with me because I was hoping we would get to talk about this. So let's assume a kid does show up late. Now they have to memorize this, and they have to recite it in front of the whole team. And I love this quote. This is a C.S. Lewis quote from the Screw Tape Letters. The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. I love that. Because you know what this quote is telling all of us? That you don't go to hell because all of a sudden one day you wake up and you're a murderer. No, there's been a lot of different things you've done along the way that have taken you to that point. And what's the first step in going to hell? An incredibly gradual, minor mistake. That's why when you go to hell, it's a safe road because everything is so gradual. Now, let's assume they screw up again. Here's what they have to memorize and recite in front of the team. And by the way, I got this from Tom Hardiman from the UNC Office of Student Conduct, and I really like this. The most important decision you are going to make in your life is your next one, because that is going to determine the rest of your life. But I love all of these. DEF CON 4 is the human brain is not fully developed until the age of 26 years old, which is important for these 17 to 22-year-olds know that I'm coaching. So let me start over. The human brain is not fully developed until the age of 26 years old. The dilemma for someone between 17 and 22 is they're smart enough to rationalize any choice, but not wise enough to make the correct one. And this next one is probably my absolute favorite. What is the challenge in trying to guide and coach the people with the afflictions referred to in 3A, which was the human brain is not fully developed? It's like trying to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and it irritates the pig. So finally, this is, the final DEF CON. The definition of hell is the way you feel on your last day on earth when the person you became meets the person you could have become. So for me, everything is about principle-centered living. So what do? Well, we've got 13 core values, and we try to guide our extraordinary young women to adulthood, and we would love for them to get there as fast as possible.
Is it still viable to find a team full of extraordinary women or athletes who feel that way in an era that has changed so much with what they expect to gain from being on a college team like the University of North Carolina?
Yes, I am the eternal optimist. It's like whenever I swing a golf club, I am always shocked when I hit a bad shot. And yet I am absolutely abominable. How could I possibly feel every time I swing that this is going to be perfect? But I am the eternal optimist. And so, yes, I come into every season thinking, you know what? This is the year. These kids are extraordinary. We're going to, take them to the promised land. We're going to have fun. So I come into every single year with that kind of optimism. And actually, this team this year, I feel that way about this group again. I love being with them. They love being with each other. They're having the time of their lives, and I can't wait to watch them play some more.
Anybody who has listened to this can tell you are someone who thrives on intense competition every single day, hopefully every single hour of every single day if possible. When it's next May and you're not on the payroll anymore, where are you gonna find that competition?
Oh well, last night it was wet, and I love to play pickleball. So I have joined a club north of town, Pickles and Play, and I found out there was a whole collection of people meeting out there. So I went out there, jumped into some pickleball games with most of these people that I didn't really know, and had the time of my life. And I love sports, always have. In the old days, I used to play noon ball, which is a noon soccer game, a pickup game with Carlos Somoano and his staff and some local coaches. And we would play that game on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I would go out to Southern Village. They've got an incredible inline hockey court out there, and I jump in and play hockey with a whole collection of friends out there as well. And it was great. So I was playing sports basically 6 days a week, and I absolutely loved it. And then all of a sudden I was playing hockey, and this was maybe 10 years ago, and I tore a hip labrum. And that's a crippling injury, certainly for someone as old as I was, because you lose your agility. And eventually I had to have my left hip replaced, and now I can't play soccer anymore or hockey. And I really miss it. And a good friend of mine that was a member of my church kept telling me for years, Anson, you have to play pickleball. You have to try it. Just come on out and play. I said, I'm not going to play that ridiculous game. I come from tennis. I had one semester of varsity tennis at St. Mary's University in St. Mary's in San Antonio, Texas. So, of course, I'm a tennis snob. No way I'm going to play that ridiculous game. So finally, this wonderful woman got me out there. I fell in love with it in the first game. And what this game has, which I really like, it has a combination of different things that make it really wonderful. First of all, I come from the violent sports world. I love playing hockey. I love colliding with things. When I was here at UNC, I played soccer and rugby, basically two collision sports. Obviously, rugby is more of a collision sport, but I just love smashing into people. And I was thinking, gosh, there's no way this game's going to entertain me in any way. But there are some wonderful, violent elements in pickleball. If someone has the audacity to play a ball high anywhere near you, one of the most satisfying things to do is to smash the pickleball right through their throat. And the nice thing about this pickleball, it's like a wiffle ball, so it doesn't really hurt them, but it stings a little. You know what I mean? If you hit them in the nose might start bleeding. There's some interesting elements. And so there are some aggressive, violent elements in the game, which, of course, is ruining my progression in pickleball, because I spend half the game trying to hit the ball as hard as I can, and all the people that are beating me have mastered what's called the dink. I am dying to eventually get there. So I am hoping during retirement I can become a bit more sedate and mature and stop trying to hit everyone in the face with the ball and start trying to dink it, because I just love everything about sports.
You'll know Anson Dorrance has reached true enlightenment when he masters the dink. As you can tell, I mean, we could talk to Anson Dorrance for forever. The great thing about talking to him is you almost never end up talking about what you thought you were going to talk about, but it's always better than what you thought you were going to talk about. So I just want to ask you one more thing, which is, at Carolina, we have lost some pillars of what I would consider Carolina athletics foundation here the last few years. Roy Williams, Mike Fox, Karen Shelton, Anson Dorrance. On the administrative side, Larry Gallo. How do we keep being Carolina without folks like you?
Well, first of all, you're paying all of us an extraordinary compliment, and I appreciate it. It would take a Frenchman to come up with this phrase, and this is from Charles de Gaulle. Anyone that doesn't know who he is, just Google him, and you will understand why he would make this statement. Graveyards are filled with irreplaceable men. Trust me, the core of that statement is every one of us is replaceable. And what I'm always hoping is that we can continue to attract the people like Dean Smith, like Roy Williams, like Karen Shelton, and like, Fox and all of these different extraordinary men and women that can set a high standard, and not just for athletic performance, but human performance, because I genuinely believe that my main job is not soccer development, it's human development. If you were to come to a women's soccer banquet at the University of North Carolina, what would shock you is our highest award is not the MVP. And by the way, our MVPs are a who's who. The highest award at the women's soccer banquet at the University of North Carolina is the Kelly Muldoon Award for Character. So for me, if I can extend anything to the young women I'm coaching, it's for them to have a principle center, for them to lead a principle-centered life. Because in my opinion, that's going to be the true measure of the perfect athletic experience for someone playing for me. So here's what I also love about what's going on now. Bubba Cunningham and I were joking about this because obviously when they put all those numbers together, even I was impressed. I'm hoping Erin Matson catches me. So I'll be watching her this fall, and I'll be watching her every fall until I am put 6 feet under. And on her current trajectory, she'll be catching me in 21 years. So, Erin, go get 'em.